If you want to go after an athlete, one of my athletes, you go after one that doesn't do the right thing. You don't downgrade him because he does everything right and may not play as well on Saturday.
That was Mike Gundy in 2007, fiercely defending his players and demanding respect. For 20 years, he was Oklahoma State's protector, their voice, their champion. But now, after being fired from the program he built, Gundy is finally breaking his silence about what really went wrong. The fall of a legend. Mike Gundy is a legend, and his fall has come as a shock to everyone.
Mike Gundy has been fired at Oklahoma State 20 years as the head coach of the Cowboys, former Oklahoma State quarterback.
To understand the magnitude of this fall, we must first appreciate the towering heights from which Mike Gundy tumbled. When sports analysts Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman sat down to dissect this shocking development, they didn't mince words about Gundy's legacy. This is the best coach Oklahoma State has ever had. He transformed a program that was perpetually dwelling in the cellar of college football into one of the most consistent and formidable forces in the Big 12 Conference. The numbers tell an incredible story of sustained excellence that few coaches in any era could match. When Mike Gundy took the job, he was promoted following Les Miles' departure for LSU in 2005. When Mike Gundy got the job, Oklahoma State was not a perennial bowl team like that was a big deal if they made a bowl game. But Gundy didn't just meet modest expectations, he shattered them completely. Under his leadership, Oklahoma State didn't just become a bowl team, they became a program where bowl eligibility wasn't just expected, it was the absolute floor for what constituted an acceptable season. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Oklahoma State went from being college football's equivalent of the Washington Generals, a team that existed primarily to make other programs look good, to becoming a legitimate national powerhouse. He made it where that was not only the expectation, but the absolute floor on a season. Think about the psychological shift that represents. For decades, Oklahoma State fans had hoped for bowl eligibility the way other programs hoped for playoff berths. Gundy made mediocrity unacceptable. The pinnacle of Gundy's remarkable tenure came in 2011, a season that Oklahoma State fans will remember forever as both their greatest triumph and their most heartbreaking near miss. In 2011, they won the Big 12. If they hadn't lost Iowa State on a Friday night, they would have played for the national title that their snub from the BCS title game essentially ushered in the college football playoff, created the college football playoff. Think about the historical significance of that statement. Oklahoma State's exclusion from the BCS national championship game was so controversial, so universally condemned as unjust, that it literally forced the creation of the college football playoff system we know today. Gundy didn't just build a great program, he built a program so undeniably excellent that its exclusion from the title game changed college football forever. The playoff system exists in part because Mike Gundy's Oklahoma State was too good to be left out of the championship conversation. For nearly 15 years, Mike Gundy was college football royalty. He was the coach who turned Oklahoma State from an afterthought into appointment television. He was the man with the mullet who could recruit, develop talent, and consistently compete with programs that had vastly superior resources and traditions. He was the embodiment of everything that made college football special: passion, authenticity, an unwavering commitment to his players, and the ability to build something meaningful from nothing. But empires don't crumble overnight. They decay slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, like rust eating away at steel, until the entire structure becomes brittle and vulnerable. And Mike Gundy's empire began showing its first hairline cracks when college football underwent the most dramatic transformation in its history: the advent of name, image, and likeness, NIL deals, and the explosion of the transfer portal. The warning signs were everywhere for those willing to see them. He went on some pretty epic rants the last few years about NIL and players, as recently as 2.5 weeks ago when they were playing Oregon. But these weren't the passionate, principled stands of a coach defending his players that had made him famous. These were something far more dangerous: the bitter complaints of a man who felt the world had changed around him without his consent or consultation. The transformation was subtle but devastating. As time went on and Oklahoma State started slipping out of contention in the Big 12 and becoming a shell of what they used to be under his guidance, those commentaries on NIL started to feel more like outward resentment towards the evolution of the game. What had once made Gundy beloved, his authenticity and willingness to speak his mind, became his Achilles heel. His honesty, once refreshing and admirable, became a window into a coach who was fundamentally unprepared for the new reality of college football. And as a result of it, yes, Oklahoma State did start paying players more as time went on, but they never were fully engaged in roster assembly at a level that they needed to be. This was the most damaging aspect of Gundy's resistance. It wasn't that he completely ignored the new landscape, it was that he engaged with it reluctantly, half-heartedly, like a man being forced to learn a language he found distasteful. The most damning revelation came when Gundy appeared on Andy and Ari's show at Big 12 Media Days, where he made an admission that shocked even seasoned observers of college football.
So the truth be known, this portal class from January is the first class that we ever bought. We had not bought portal goods.
Think about the staggering implications of that statement. For 3 full years, 3 complete recruiting cycles, Oklahoma State had essentially opted out of the most fundamental aspect of modern college football roster construction. While their competitors were aggressively pursuing transfer portal talent and using NIL money to build championship caliber rosters, Mike Gundy was hoping the entire system would simply disappear like a bad dream. Well, he came on our show at Big 12 Media Days and said we weren't paying anybody out of the transfer portal for the last 3 years, which you can say that's a principled stand, I guess, for one of those years. But by year 3, it's a gross dereliction of duty. The phrase gross dereliction of duty is particularly harsh but entirely accurate. A head coach's primary responsibility is to put his program in the best possible position to succeed. By refusing to engage with NIL and the transfer portal, Gundy was actively hampering his program's ability to compete.
I thought this will go away. Surely this can't last. And then it just kept building momentum. And then after a point, about 18 months ago, I said, this is not going away. We're going to have to make some real adjustments here.
The analogy that Andy Staples used to describe Gundy's approach was both perfect and devastating. It's like you have an engine light on and you just turn your car off and hope it doesn't turn back on when you turn the car on, you know? It's like at a certain point that check engine light might not be a big deal, but you keep driving around hoping it goes away. Your engine's going to explode. This wasn't just a bad loss. This was a program-defining moment that crystallized everything that had gone wrong. A coach who had once elevated Oklahoma State to national prominence had become the primary obstacle preventing the program from competing at even a basic level in their own conference. The loss to Tulsa wasn't an upset, it was an indictment. The man behind the mullet. The genesis of this legendary moment began with something as simple and routine as a newspaper column. Jenny Carlson, a columnist for The Oklahoman, had written a piece criticizing Oklahoma State quarterback Bobby Reed following the team's loss to Troy University. But what she likely intended as routine sports commentary, the kind of player criticism that happens in every newspaper in America every week, became the catalyst for something unprecedented in the pre-social media era of sports journalism. When Mike Gundy stepped to that podium on that September afternoon, he wasn't just defending a player. He was making a statement about loyalty, about protecting young people, about the responsibilities that come with having a platform to criticize amateur athletes, and about the fundamental humanity that should underpin all sports coverage. What followed was a masterpiece of unscripted passion that would be replayed millions of times over the next 2 decades.
Talk about this article right here. If anybody hasn't read this article, I don't read it. This was brought to me by a mother of children. I think this is worth reading. Let me tell you why I want to talk about this article. 3/4 of this is inaccurate.
The power in Gundy's voice was unmistakable from the very first words. This wasn't a calculated media strategy or a carefully crafted public relations move orchestrated by some communications department. This was a man genuinely outraged by what he saw as an unfair attack on one of his players, and his authenticity resonated in a way that manufactured sound bites never could. The fact that a mother had brought him the article added another layer of authenticity. This wasn't even something he had sought out to be angry about.
It's fiction. And this article embarrasses me to be involved with athletics tremendously. And that article had to have been written by a person that doesn't have a child.
The context of this defense cannot be overstated. In 2007, social media was in its infancy. Twitter had barely launched and was still primarily used by tech early adopters. Facebook was still primarily for college students. YouTube was just 2 years old and hadn't yet become the dominant video platform it is today. The idea that a college football coach's press conference could go viral was almost incomprehensible. Yet Gundy's rant did exactly that, becoming one of the first truly viral sports moments in the digital age.
If your child goes down the street and somebody makes fun of him because he dropped a pass in a pickup game, or says he's fat, and he comes home crying to his mom, you'd understand. But you didn't have that.
The emotional intelligence displayed in these words was remarkable and showed a side of coaching that fans rarely see. Gundy wasn't just defending Bobby Reed as a quarterback, he was defending him as a young man, as someone's son, as a human being deserving of basic decency and respect. It was this genuine care for his players that would define Gundy's coaching philosophy throughout his career and make him beloved by the young men who played for him.
But someday you will. And when your child comes home, you'll understand. If you want to go after an athlete one of my athletes, you go after one that doesn't do the right things. You don't downgrade him because he does everything right and may not play as well on Saturday. And you let us make that decision.
This was coaching philosophy, distilled to its essence. The idea that character matters more than performance, that young people deserve protection from adult criticism when they're doing everything right, and that coaches have a responsibility to shield their players from unfair attacks. It was old school in the best possible way, but the moment that truly launched Gundy into immortality came next, with 4 words that would be quoted, memed, referenced, and parodied for generations.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40! I'm not a kid.
The timing of this rant was absolutely perfect from a media consumption standpoint. The timing of that, Andy, was so interesting because as YouTube wasn't completely where it is today, obviously being almost 20 years ago, and something like that happened, you remember how SportsCenter used to play stuff, right? They used to just do it on a loop every 30 minutes. ESPN's SportsCenter was still the dominant force in sports media, the place where all sports fans got their news and highlights. And when they latched onto Gundy's rant, they played it relentlessly. And I remember that day, and they would just open up SportsCenter with that rant. And you would see it 8 times on national television in one given night. And it was just a groundbreaking, ground-shaking moment. This was the pre-streaming era, when millions of Americans still gathered around their televisions at the same time to watch the same programming. The rant didn't just go viral. It became appointment viewing, must-see TV that brought people together in shared amazement. The cultural impact was immediate and far-reaching across all levels of the sport. Urban Meyer, who was coaching Florida at the time and would go on to win multiple national championships, sought out Andy Staples specifically to ask about the rant. I see Urban Meyer, who's walking out to the practice field. He was the head coach at Florida at the time, and he goes, "Did you see what Gundy said?" When coaches at that level, coaches who were competing for national championships and dealing with their own media circuses, were stopping their routines to discuss a press conference from a mid-tier Big 12 program, you knew something special had happened. The rant became more than just a viral moment. It became Mike Gundy's calling card, his personal brand long before anyone was talking about personal brands in sports. I remember Mason Rudolph, the great quarterback from Oklahoma State, who grew up in South Carolina. So the first awareness he had of Mike Gundy was the rant. And when Mike Gundy called to start recruiting him, he's like, "Oh, you're that guy." High school recruits who weren't even born when some coaches started their careers knew Mike Gundy because of 4 words delivered with passionate intensity on a September afternoon in Stillwater. I think that people who have no appreciation for the consistency that Oklahoma State showed under his leadership are familiar with the rant. I think the rant is more of a calling card and more of a personal identifier for him than any of the success that he had on the field. This is both a testament to the power of the moment and, in hindsight, somewhat tragic. A coach who built one of the most successful programs in Oklahoma State history became more famous for a 3-minute press conference than for 2 decades of excellence.
Makes me want to puke.
That final line, delivered as Gundy walked away from the podium, became the perfect punctuation mark on a perfect rant. It encapsulated everything about his personality: the authenticity, the passion, the complete inability to filter his emotions when it came to protecting his players, and the kind of raw honesty that was already becoming rare in an increasingly corporate sports landscape. But the rant was just the beginning of what made Mike Gundy one of college football's most captivating and authentic personalities. Mike Gundy always did fun stuff, like, he'd wear the wrestling singlet to drum up support for the wrestling program. He'd go hunt rattlesnakes. Like, he's an interesting guy, the mullet. The mullet in particular became as much a part of Oklahoma State's identity as their orange and black uniforms or their pistol-firing mascot. And he embraced that. Like, he'd lean into it and, talk about how he's got the person who does his mullet. And I think he was one of the most fun characters in college football. In an era where coaches were becoming increasingly corporate and media trained, where every word was carefully crafted by communications departments and every public appearance was scripted, Gundy remained refreshingly authentic. He didn't try to be someone he wasn't for the cameras or the press conferences. This authenticity extended to every aspect of his public persona and made him a favorite among media members who were tired of interviewing robots. He always just said what was on his mind. Whether you agreed with him about whatever he was talking about, it didn't matter. He was just going to give you an unfiltered response. In an increasingly sanitized world of corporate speak and carefully crafted sound bites, Gundy's willingness to speak his mind made him a beloved figure among fans and media members alike. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. The same unfiltered honesty that had made Mike Gundy a folk hero in 2007 had, by 2023, made him a liability to the program he had spent 2 decades building. The man who had once defended his players with such passion and moral clarity was now attacking the very people whose loyalty and support had made his success possible. the reckoning, and what comes next. The final chapter of Mike Gundy's Oklahoma State tenure wasn't written in the boardrooms where contract extensions are signed or in the trophy cases where championship hardware is displayed. It was written on a cold December afternoon in Stillwater, Oklahoma, where the Cowboys suffered perhaps the most embarrassing loss in program history, a home defeat to the University of Tulsa that served as the final nail in the coffin of a once legendary coaching career. To understand just how devastating this loss was, you need to understand the context and the vast chasm that should have existed between these two programs. Tulsa, despite being located just 90 minutes away from Stillwater, operates in a completely different universe from Oklahoma State when it comes to college football resources, facilities, recruiting budget, and overall program infrastructure. Tulsa doesn't have as much money as Oklahoma State. Tulsa should not have better players than Oklahoma State, but if you watch that game, they were very evenly matched. This wasn't just a bad loss. It was a program-defining moment that crystallized everything that had gone wrong under Gundy's leadership in recent years. And for most of the game, Tulsa was dominant. Think about that for a moment. A program that Mike Gundy had built into a consistent Big 12 contender, a team that had once competed for national championships and regularly appeared in the Associated Press Top 25 poll, was being dominated at home by a Conference USA opponent with a fraction of their budget and resources. The visual was devastating. Oklahoma State's Boone-Pickens Stadium, a facility that had hosted College Game Day and witnessed some of the most memorable moments in Big 12 history, had become the site of an upset so profound that it defied rational explanation. This wasn't David beating Goliath. This was Goliath forgetting how to be Goliath. But the Tulsa loss wasn't an anomaly or a fluke. It was the inevitable conclusion of 3 years of systematic neglect, stubborn resistance to change, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what modern college football required. The warning signs had been visible for anyone willing to look, flashing red for months like emergency signals that went unheeded. He made some comments that pissed off Dan Lanning, the Oregon coach. These weren't strategic mind games or motivational tactics designed to give his team an edge. They were the desperate attempts of a coach who knew his team was outmatched and was trying to manage expectations before the inevitable blowout. When we talked about those comments, they weren't really directed at Oregon. He was managing expectations for what was going to happen during that game because he's an experienced coach and he'd seen the film. He knew they were going to get obliterated and it was going to look awful. This was Mike Gundy, the architect of Oklahoma State's golden era, essentially conceding defeat before his team even took the field. It was the ultimate admission of failure. I don't know if he thought, hey, if I just say they spent more money than us, that's going to be okay. It's not okay because Oklahoma State doesn't have as much money as Oregon, but Oklahoma State has enough money to field a competitive football team in 2025, and they're not competitive. This insight cuts to the heart of Gundy's failure. The issue wasn't resources. Oklahoma State had sufficient resources to compete. The issue was how those resources were being utilized and deployed. And there are other teams in the Big 12 with similar circumstances that are very good. Like why? What is the reason that Oklahoma State can't be competitive? This was the damning question that exposed the hollow nature of Gundy's excuses. Other programs with similar or even inferior resources were thriving in the new college football landscape. The difference wasn't money, it was leadership. The most damning aspect of Gundy's final years wasn't just the losses, it was the complete disconnect he had developed with his own roster, a detachment so profound that it bordered on professional negligence. In what became an infamous moment during Big 12 media days, Gundy made an admission that shocked even seasoned observers. He was unfamiliar with nearly half of his own team. I think it was apparent the second he sat next to us in Dallas and told us he was unfamiliar with 40% of his roster that we knew this wasn't going to go well. The decision to fire Gundy wasn't made in haste or anger following the Tulsa loss. It was the culmination of a careful evaluation process that had been ongoing for months, if not years, as the administration watched their once proud program deteriorate under the leadership of the man who had built it. It wasn't just a reaction to losing to Tulsa, Andy. It was a reaction to the 3 years of behavior and the 3 years of not doing the job that allowed them to get to a point where this was possible. The timing of the firing, in the middle of the season rather than waiting until its conclusion, sent a clear and unmistakable message about just how untenable the situation had become. Every single day that he is your head coach is a liability. When a program reaches the point where keeping their head coach for even a few more weeks is seen as actively harmful to the institution, to the players, and to the program's future, you know the relationship has deteriorated beyond any possibility of repair. And I think if the answer to that question leads back to the head coach's reluctance or unwilling to evolve with the way things are done, then every single day that he is your head coach is a liability. This wasn't about one bad game or even one bad season. This was about a systematic failure to adapt to the changing landscape of college football. Despite the undeniable necessity of the firing, the end of Mike Gundy's tenure raises profound questions about loyalty, gratitude, and how college football treats its legends. Do you think that it is in bad taste to fire a coach who has dedicated more than 2 decades of his life to you in the middle of the season? Or do you think that because it was so bad that they had a responsibility to do it now? The answer, as painful as it might be for those who value loyalty above all else, lies in the cold reality of modern college athletics. You are being paid a king's ransom to do a job, and the moment you're not doing that job, you're in danger of getting fired. Mike Gundy's $15 million buyout, while enormous by normal standards, represents the cost of doing business in an industry where success is measured in wins and losses, not sentiment and loyalty. The thing that is so crazy to me about coaching that is basically virtually not true in most other instances in life is that if you dedicate your life. My mother has worked at Chase for 30 years. When she goes out, she gets to go out on her terms. You know what I mean? Because there's an appreciation factor. This comparison highlights the unique and often cruel nature of coaching, a profession where past success provides no immunity from present failure. But she's not Chase's CEO during a massive downturn for Chase, not Chase's CEO not doing her job. The analogy is apt. When you're in a position of ultimate responsibility, the standards and expectations are correspondingly higher. The challenge now facing Oklahoma State is finding someone who can simultaneously honor Gundy's incredible legacy while charting a completely different course for the program's future. The job requirements are daunting and reflect the reality of modern college football. You go in and you get somebody who's energized and invigorated by the challenge of NIL, somebody who wants to recruit their ass off, who wants to go out and weaponize whatever money they do have. Ben Arbuckle, the Oklahoma offensive corner, who's only 29 years old right now, by the way, which by the way is in vogue right now. Young offense. The emphasis on youth isn't just about energy. It's about finding coaches who grew up with the tools and systems that now define college football success. The next chapter of Oklahoma State football begins now, with new leadership, new philosophy, and new hope. But the Mike Gundy era, with all its complexities and contradictions, will forever remain a defining period in the program's history, a reminder of what can be achieved with vision and determination, and what can be lost when that vision becomes clouded by resistance to change. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.